I've got to round up, so I'll finish this. And so then the final stage there, in Sugimori's design, and then I talk about, I'm just going to talk briefly about Oddish. Okay. In Sugimori's design for the plant Pokemon Oddish, we see the perfect expression of a toy Pokemon, connoting pure cuteness, minimal and spherical, with head of bright green leaves. Eventually, Oddish evolves into the larger Vileplume, and the design shifts from toy to repose. Vileplume carries a peculiar bloom on the top of its head, like a teetering sombrero. From under its tilted hat, the Pokemon looks directly at us, its red eyes shining out from the shade. Its gesture remains open as in Oddish, as does the smile, but the tilting gesture of the plume suggests an added quality of ambiguity, a complex rhetoric evoked by the plant life Sugimori references. It's a Rafflesia flower, which smells of rotten flesh. He's using this symbol of kind of decadent sort of plant life and so on. And so in the second state of the big three, now Ivysaur, Charmeleon, and Wartortle, there is an interiority and seriousness to their expression. If you're familiar with Japanese art, in a Japanese art historical context, these designs evoke the ancient statues of the Todaiji temple, of Komokuten, and so on, the guardian of the west of the four guardian kings, symbolizing the Un of Aun. What that means is a sculpture which has an expression that is the spirit of power in reserve, so a sculpture which has the feeling as though it's containing something, and it still has more to, it has to develop, but it's kind of containing something. So my final category, okay, the last three, I define as counterpose. Counterpose is the final category of Pokemon I have observed, and is largely limited to the final evolutionary stage of the character, or to legendary Pokemon. I take the term counterpose from the Italian contrapposto, meaning to counterpoise. As in the classic example, the counterpose describes how the pose of the character simultaneously conveys a sense of relaxation and dynamism, and in so doing seats power firmly within the creature. In the final forms of the big three, Venusaur, Charizard, and Blastoise, each stands in counterpose, subtly orientating their weight onto one leg to suggest a potential movement while looking through or away from the viewer. The eyes are the most resolved and human-like and challenge the authority of the Pokemon trainer, alluding to the fact that at the end of their evolutionary chain emerges the proposition of Pokemon as autonomous from their viewer. And this is really, really important to Neo-Baroque entertainment media like this, is that if you see complex creatures like the third stage Pokemon and cute as being on a spectrum, across that spectrum is also articulated a notion of agency, and that part of the threat or the ambiguous element of the Japanese Neo-Baroque is this notion of artificial intelligence and of a thing kind of articulating itself and kind of threatening us. Okay, so I go on to talk about seriality, but I'm not obviously going to be able to do that. Pokemon, okay, has, you know your characters through their appearance, but you also know them in numerous other ways, and all games have this sense that there are various epistemes through which you know your characters. You know them in image terms because you're able to look at them and draw them and appreciate them and all of that stuff, but you also know them in data terms. You know them through screens like this based on their level, how developed they are, and Pokemon has this system. You know them through selection screens like this, another episteme, and each of these screens which organize information in this way are concerned with human-computer interface design, and in having those concerns, they draw upon the organization of information within art history, and in so doing, unconsciously repeat the formal arrangement of information that you see in the Baroque and things like that. In these design sheets, again, you see the articulation of pose and things like that. Here's another screen which describes the way a character is gaining ability in various martial techniques. It's been chosen to be visualized in this way. You have these kind of character screens which collate together in a kind of dense visual field of various kind of characters. Here's another screen where you have a labyrinth along which you place tokens which then define the growth of the character. Okay? And then, of course, in contemporary games like this Final Fantasy here, or Final Fantasy 8, sorry, and so on, you have sophisticated, contemporary, technologically driven, hyper-real imagery as its own episteme, with its own genealogy and so on. And it all comes together in contemporary video games like this. Okay? So the Baroque, in a Japanese context, is concerned with this epistemological, multivalent epistemological representation of its object by letting go of ontological concerns, as we see in ukiyo-e art, and shifting toward a kind of a pleasure in the simulacra, a pleasure in the visual field and the graphic array of the image. It then intensifies culturally the various epistemological ways in which we get to know that object. Because materiality is no longer an explicit concern, the object has to become known in various other ways. And video games do that by creating various itineraries which describe the characters. Okay. So, here's some more Pokédexes. I'm just going to conclude now, because I see the clock and stuff. Japan's Neo-Baroque sensibility, then, can be thought of as being composed from three interleaving elements. Walter spoke about this notion of the Baroque constitution earlier on. And for me, if we were to think of Japan's Neo-Baroque constitution, okay, it's the three constantly interleaving elements of the Rikyū genealogy. So it's Japan's indigenous concept which speaks to values similar to Baroque. So Japan's indigenous tradition which parallels the Baroque. It's the otaku fandom and production element. So that's the fan-centered production reciprocity between making and consuming. And then it's Japan's ongoing and intelligent receptivity to Western influences and techno-modernity. And those three qualities essentially are in a constant process, essentially creating this Neo-Baroque paradigm in a Japanese context. And you can talk about it as Baroque because Japan, more than any other nation, has this incredible receptivity to Western aesthetic regimes and so on. Okay, a bit sprawling and a bit notey, but there you go. Thank you.